This lesson is a final review of Macbeth for your test. Okay, so the central question is what is a tragic hero when we're talking about a Shakespearean drama, and even before that, a classically considered tragic hero? So, a couple of characteristics. This is a character that has to be admirable. It's got to be someone that we care about with great potential who has a catastrophic end. So normally tragic heroes aren't villains. They're good people that we sympathize with because we feel bad as an audience when they are struck low by the end of the play. They should also be someone who's important. In Shakespeare, you're never going to see a tragic hero that's a lowly peasant because for a tragic hero to be the hero, it's got to have major consequences. So whole kingdoms need to be affected. Whole groups of people, wars happen over tragic heroes. So someone who is politically or otherwise very important. And finally, a tragic hero has one understandable flaw, a tragic flaw that helps contribute to their end. It's understandable, but it is a flaw. Not tragic heroes aren't perfect, and it's this flaw, like ambition for Macbeth, that need for power that ultimately contributes to the end. So Shakespeare is building off of classic Greek theater. Remember, everything in the Renaissance, the artists were really looking to the works of the classics when they were creating their own masterpieces. For Sophocles, writing in ancient Greece, he viewed the tragedy as having three specific moments. First of all, for the hero, there has to be a peripeteia, which is a reversal, a change from good to bad, usually by surprise. Now, if you remember when we talked at the beginning of the year about Oedipus Rex, that's the classic Greek tragedy. Sophocles considered it to be the most perfect tragedy. For in that play, Oedipus suddenly realizes that through no fault of his own, because his birth origins were obscured, that he is the cause of a terrible curse on his kingdom. And the original curse, the crime against nature, which he was an unwitting party to, is that he has accidentally married his genetic mother and murdered his genetic father. Now, he didn't know that was what was happening at the time because, again, his birth origins were obscured from him. But at the very end of the play, he realizes the truth of his origins, and in that moment, everything falls away from him. He can no longer be king because he's an abomination. He's going to be thrown out of the kingdom and ostracized. So his fortunes have been completely reversed. He goes from being king to being an outcast. So peripeteis, reversal. Anagnoresis is the recognition. So this is when the protagonist not only has that reversal, but realizes the magnitude of the reversal. So Oedipus realizes the terrible nature of his situation, and he realizes the consequences, that he's about to be thrown out of the kingdom in disgrace. In most powerful tragedies, the reversal and the recognition occur all at once. And again, for Sophocles, Oedipus Rex was the perfect tragedy because Oedipus realizes this terrible thing, and it's the greatest fall of a hero from king to basically nothing. And then comes the pathos, and this is the suffering, the destructive, painful agony, and death at the end of the play. Now, for Greek tragedy, a lot of times death would be the best case scenario for our hero. Poor Oedipus runs off stage once he realizes the truth. He follows his wife slash mother. She off stage hangs herself with her dress, and Oedipus then pulls out the pins from her dress and gouges out his own eyes. And the symbolism here is obvious. Once Oedipus, quote unquote, sees the truth of his situation, he goes physically blind. So the three moments of a perfect tragedy happen at the end: the peripeteia, the anagnoresis, and then the suffering, the pathos. So when Shakespeare was leaning on these ancient plays, for Macbeth, we don't have kind of this big, powerful moment at the end of the play. Instead, Macbeth's tragedy is his suffering almost takes place from the very beginning of the play to the end. Now, at the beginning of the play, everyone does have great respect for Macbeth. He's a loyal warrior for King Duncan. He wins the war for Scotland. Everyone agrees he is a good nobleman, a true warrior for Scotland. Other soldiers describe him as exemplary, as courageous, and it seems, at least in the very opening of the play, that Macbeth is a person with great potential for good. He's named the Thane of Cawdor. He is, awarded by the king. So it seems like he has a promising future. However, Macbeth doesn't quite fit into the definition of a tragic hero because he becomes a murderer so fast. We have very little time to relate to Macbeth as honorable and good. We don't really see him being that way as an audience. Instead, from the very first moments of the play, he's starting to consider the evil actions he would have to take in order to fulfill the witch's prophecy. And by Act Two, he's committed treason and murder. He's killed three people, including the king, by the end of Act Two, only to go on to murder children, innocent victims, people who have no way of opposing him, just out of his own paranoia. So he certainly fits the characteristics of a villain. By the end of Macbeth, most of the time, the audience might have a little sympathy left for Macbeth, or at least some sadness for him. But most of the time, I think the audience is ready for Macbeth to go at the end of the play. All right, so what does make Macbeth sympathetic to the audience? I mean, for one thing, he is, human. He's aware of his actions. He's aware of the evil growing within him. He still has some moments of sympathy towards his wife and kindness towards his wife. So it's not as if he's a villain that we really, really love to hate. There's some human qualities of Macbeth that make him, that at least will sadden an audience to see him fall so low. Now, usually there's only one tragic hero, a character with a major flaw that brings about his or her own destruction. For Shakespeare, it would most exclusively be men, his destruction. Romeo and Juliet are an exception to this rule because those are two characters whose love for each other is star-crossed, ends tragically. It's no one's fault. It's just fate. But mostly tragic heroes do not intend evil. Mostly they just set out for good, but through a series of unfortunate events, eventually comes to a bad end. Macbeth is unique in that he knows what he is doing is wrong. He's self-aware, and yet he can't resist it anyway. And even knowing that he is stepping into blood, as he says, wading back would be just as difficult. So it's just as easy to keep going and become evil as it is to try and redeem yourself and become good. All right, now the parts of the play here, just to review. In the exposition, the witches appear and state the prophecy: Macbeth will become king. In the rising action, Malcolm is appointed as the successor to the throne. Lady Macbeth urges her husband to commit murder, and then Macbeth kills Duncan to take the throne. The climax of the play is the murder of Banquo and the escape of Fleance. The falling action, the ghost appears at the banquet. Macduff goes to England. Macbeth seeks advice from the witches. Macduff's family is murdered. Malcolm and Macduff join forces against Macbeth, and Lady Macbeth goes insane, and the battle begins. And then the catastrophic end is the death of Macbeth. All right, so moving ahead here, the tomorrow speech. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. What does Macbeth mean by this? Well, Shakespeare constantly uses metaphors of theater and acting in order to make his points. And here, Macbeth turns life into a poor player, an actor on the stage. Day after day, one after another, life continues all the way until the very end of time. We do not learn anything from our yesterdays, but they have lighted fools the way to dusty death. So all of our yesterdays pile up. We learn nothing from them all the way out until our dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Now, here is the metaphor. Life is but a walking shadow, a poor player, an actor strutting and fretting his hour on the stage, and then the play ends and he is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. So life is loud and boisterous. Life is chaotic, seemingly full of surprises. But at the end, Macbeth believes that even though life is loud, it's pointless. So Macbeth doesn't have a moment like Oedipus where he sees this great reversal of fortunes, where he experiences a total acknowledgement of his fall and then has pathos. Instead, Macbeth seems to be in an eternal moment of pathos, all the way from Act 2 to Act 5. And by the end of it, he realizes it was all pointless, it was all for nothing. So Macbeth's character here, again, we might not sympathize with him in the same way we would with a good person who, through no fault of his own, comes to a terrible end. Macbeth does terrible things, inexcusable things, but it's this moment where he has a total self knowledge of just how little he has gained from being evil, how low he has fallen, how pointless it all was. That's the moment where you can see that Macbeth is still human, and even though he might deserve his ending, we can still feel sad for him. We can still feel that that perhaps he let the dark forces take over. Perhaps the witches were controlling him all along. Whatever the case may be, his evil, his ambition added up to nothing. And he seems to acknowledge how fruitless all of it really was.